Five Nights at Freddy's is no stranger to mysterious characters, most of which don't get their full story or identity spelled out, even if they become a reoccurring character. Likewise, Fnaf's no stranger to rabbits. There have been so many rabbit characters, and to this point, most of them have been connected. Almost all of them are a version of Bonnie. Those who aren't are usually associated with Afton, the main villain and murderer. In fact, our most recent bunnies have been directly connected to Afton. And then there's one outlier, one strange case, one weird rabbit. This rabbit. Mxes. Mxes. Also known as the Entity. In fact, this thing might just be the Entity and Mxes is just the box. But I'm gonna keep calling him Mxes anyway. Mxes is an acronym, but what it means, we actually know, but we will need to get some backstory out of the way before we can get there, both for dramatic effect and so I don't get too ahead of myself. For now, Mxes. Let me be blunt with you. I've exaggerated in the past. Usually not because I'm lying, but because compromises with Fnaf can be so close to the line. Like saying that Gregory and Mimic are both the most divisive Fnaf characters. And in a way, I think there's a good argument that both of them are. Why I'm bringing this up is because I know what I'm about to say is something I have said before for other characters and plotlines. But I stand beside this now that I have sat down and thought about it really hard. The Mxes is by far one of the most complicated Fnaf characters. Not because of what it is, we almost know exactly what it is, but because of everything surrounding it. Basically, the Mxes went from a character who we knew right off the bat what it was, but not where it came from, to having so many extra details that it became hard to see the forest through the trees. And that's the easiest way to explain it. Mxes is quite possibly a fully explained character who has so many details that are partially told out of order that it still looks like a mystery. Especially since the Mxes surrounds one of the most unexplained aspects in the Fnaf games, being the virtual world as shown in Ruin. That is specifically the virtual world where you can effectively walk through walls and alter reality entirely. But I won't be talking much about that today. We stick to the Mxes. Where do we even start? I mean, I'm going to start with the physical description and then hop into Ruin first, but it feels like every part of the Mxes comes with an attached ramble explaining another Fnaf concept. He is such a loaded topic. So let me take this one step at a time. Let's start with the design. Mxes is a dark blue or purple virtual rabbit. In fact, it facially looks a little closer to a hare than a rabbit, but due to almost every bunny character being a rabbit, I'll just assume that it's a stylized rabbit. It looks a dark blue in Ruin, while appearing to look dark purple in Help Wanted 2. Though, since it retains that blue color in merchandise, I'm just gonna say that that's its default color. Its gender is not confirmed, but went from being likely male to complicated in the last year, so I'm going to mostly refer to him as a he, as is my default for some reason. Definitely looks like a he to me. It has a long body that tapers off into a tail with no legs, with a coil of wires exposed on its waist. It has wide shoulders and a slightly hunched posture with detached shoulders that connect to disembodied elbows and free-floating human-like hands by electrical tethers. There's a lot of blocky edges and ships that are removed from it, like it's glitching out, which plays into it being a virtual being, along with the glowing lines through its chest and head. It has short, upright ears. Its head is almost skeletal shaped, with square eyes and glowing round eyeballs with black square pupils, and a flat nose, and a broad white glowing grin. Though Mxes has the ability to close his mouth, and in fact emulate expression to an extent. And most of those expressions are smug grins, sinister glares, and then a blank sort of, "oh, I screwed up" face. But overall the impression is rather ghastly, if a little chiseled. But the goal isn't to look startlingly handsome, it's to look like a ghost, with its skull face, detached floating limbs, and ghastly tail. And it should be noted that the entity wasn't always supposed to look like this. The Mxes' original design was instead much more skeletal and hideous, and I mean that. Look at it. Again, a bony skeleton with some sort of fleshy purple grime clinging to it. glowing white eyes and an off-blue core with long arms and fingers, exposed rib and pelvis bones, some seriously bat-like hook toes, and a skull that greatly resembles a hare skull, just with like the House of Ashes monster teeth. On the higher definition models, you can even see coils and wires underneath that thin skin. It really is the Mxes, alright, just like the more realistic, more grotesque version. More corpse than bunny. That's not the only change either. The Mxes is associated with rabbit head-shaped security nodes in its own image, though in this beta form, those were going to be organic lumps of this fleshy stuff. Ugh. It's a big difference comparing the two directly. Okay, but enough of the direct description. Let's address the elephant in the room, being how the Mxes went from an embalmed freak to handsome Bonnie. I don't need to tell you this, but Fnaf's gotten a bit of flack for toning itself down for a younger audience, especially recently. And I'm on both sides of the fence in this argument specifically because I like that the games are doing stuff like friendly animatronics and that we get to see them being cute sometimes, and that the locations aren't just like dismal and creepy and dark, but also vibrant. I love the daycare. I love the display areas in Secret of the Mimic. And I get that some of these elements might be to entice younger audiences, but you know what? There's a younger audience sitting inside my heart, and she loved the Foxy Puppet Show. The only thing that was missing was Sun. But, things like censoring blood, no, not actual blood, but the word blood, which then helped set off the Gregory robot theory when it first got on its feet, gave it a little push down the sidewalk. From the mention of blood, when Gregory was supposed to get a scratch, then taking away Vanny's knife and replacing it with a pizza cutter. Okay, that one's kind of silly, because if the pizza cutter is sharp enough to be a weapon, then it's just as dangerous as a knife. Guess it just doesn't have the associated age rating attached. What I'm getting at is that I'm assuming this change from creepy Mxes to charming Mxes could have been a similar situation of toning down the rating, since it was connected with Security Breach, the game that had to receive so much censoring. Likely, and this is a guess off of my head, maybe had something to do with the deal with Sony. Just a guess, might have not been the case. And because of that, we did lose out on something that could have been really nerve-wracking here. That being said, I can't deny that I really like the Mxes' design. I like his design so much that I had a running joke about me simping over him up until Secret of the Mimic made things between us complicated. It's not exactly scary anymore, but it's at least fetching enough that I like him, you know? Hey, my goal with any character is to at least like what I see, and I liked both designs. It was a shame to lose the old one, but I can't turn down the new one. But that's like skin deep, literally. That's just what it looks like. It's embarrassing that I already spent this long going on about it. Oof. So let's get this train back on the rails and chug along. Alright, we know what the Mxes looks like, but what is it? The Mxes is a program, a corruption, a virtual extension of this box. From what we know, Gregory and a friend found a creature known as the Mimic underneath the Pizzaplex. Well, technically the friend likely already knew about it, as per Candy Cadet's story, but this creature needs no introduction. But in short, he mimics people and he's extremely aggressive. He has a habit of faking voices, climbing into mascot suits, and snapping technicians like twigs with little remorse. He is crafty, cruel, and extremely resentful against those who wrong him, even when he's actively trying to kill them. There's a reason this thing needs to be contained. A Candy Cadet story tells about a monster in a basement luring a little boy by pretending to mimic his mother's voice, and while there's not yet been a confirmation, this is likely how Gregory ended up encountering the Mimic for the first time, leaving behind some of his stuff, including a backpack and a radio. It's not told whether the box was already set up at this point or if it was made afterwards, but due to Gregory knowing what the box is and the virtual world being directly accessed by a Vanny mask, it's likely IT specialist and former possessed puppet Vanessa who set this all up, setting it up deep underneath the sinkhole, underneath the Pizzaplex, in the building underneath the pizzeria, underneath the Pizzaplex. The Mimic is extremely dangerous, cunning, and powerful. So they need something that's not only capable of controlling all of the remaining systems in the Pizzaplex, but who can put the remaining hardware to use. And that's where Mxes comes in. This entity is the security guard and warden of the abandoned Pizzaplex. It would keep an eye out for intruders and then send the broken down animatronics after them to either end them or drive them off. Considering that there's a lot of graffiti in the Pizzaplex, but the animatronics seem to be contained to their own locations, at least until Cassie comes up on them, and most of the building seems to be closed up, Cassie really has to work to get through, the Mxes was likely successful in keeping away most people. You know, you go in, you hear something weird, leave, no big deal. Or it was effective at hiding bodies. Either way, the Mimic was kept contained. Until the events of Ruin. Now so far, everything seems extremely simple to follow. And it really is. Virtual security guard keeping this thing in the basement being ran out of this box. All good, let's continue with Ruin. In Ruin, the Mimic, using that radio Gregory left behind, is able to contact his friend Cassie and lure her to the Pizzaplex under the guise of being Gregory so that she'll free him. After she gets a Vanny mask that allows her to access the virtual side of the Pizzaplex, the Mimic guides her and begins instructing her on deactivating the security nodes and virtual reality dampeners and mechanisms to stop the mask to get deeper inside. And shortly after that, she starts to get followed by the mysterious rabbit himself, Mxes, that rabbit thing, which begins to try and thwart her progress. But what Cassie doesn't realize is that she's being tricked, and what she's doing is slowly going through and shutting down Mxes' control over the building. At one point, even using a firewall to burn the entity, though it does return after a while. So she is fooled into believing it's the bad guy, and he's dogging her, intending to drive her out, or kill her in the process. He can't kill directly, but the animatronics under his influence certainly can. Because, like I said, he's there to keep the Mimic contained, first and foremost. We don't even know if the Mxes is capable of greater thoughts or empathy, because it doesn't speak, and it makes no attempt to communicate with Cassie. Seemingly. Cassie goes all around the Pizzaplex with this thing throwing animatronics, security blockades, and even go-karts at her. But she makes it to the sinkhole, even shutting down her favorite animatronic, the beloved Roxanne Wolf, to make it down, under her raceway to the flooded caves filled with glowing mushrooms and into some sort of structure hidden beneath the Pizzaplex. Well, some sort of structure, the pizzeria simulator pizzeria. This is where Cassie confronts the Mxes for the last time by finding its box, its physical body, and the terminal connected that controls it. It asks if she wants to proceed now that the security protocols are off. She clicks yes, and this shuts down the final security protocol. The Mxes itself. The entity pulls itself out of its box and reaches for Cassie, only to get dragged back inside and the process to shut down, leaving Cassie free to go to the Mimic, through a concrete wall. But hey, she does it. And unfortunately through this, Mimic is set free, and only stopped from attacking Cassie by Roxy showing up and Gregory guiding her away. Gregory finally getting in contact with her. Now at this point, the Mxes is totally gone, but it's important to mention something that happens after this point. In one of the endings, Cassie runs into an elevator and the Mimic tries to reach its arm through and gets it broken off. Gregory then tells you that it's too risky to have the Mimic follow you, and despite not being at the Pizzaplex, he manages to drop the elevator down the shaft. Cassie is knocked out and the game ends. And with it, assumedly, came the end of the Mxes. Though there was a possibility of it being explained further on, considering the situation surrounding it. This random bunny-shaped security program being connected to a box that looks very old. It's not noticeable in-game, but pulling the model out reveals that, yeah, it's pretty old-looking. Where did it come from? Why is it connected with the Vanny mask? Well, there were plenty of hints that Vanessa was involved, but no concrete confirmation. Just concrete walls. There were questions about the Mxes, but on the whole, there was enough information to put together what this thing was at the very least. Until the teaser for Secret of the Mimic came out, and Mxes made his unexpected return. Help Wanted 2 released without any mention of the Mxes, oddly. Though the virtual world and the Vanny mask were both large parts of the storyline and the gimmick of flipping to harder levels. The story involves our unknown main character inadvertently helping Vanny and defeating Glitchtrap once and for all. Originally, Vanny's role was going to be much bigger, with her sending messages likely through Mystic Hippo and handing out memory dolls that would then be used to open Princess Quest and make a deal with Old Man Consequences. But Vanny suffered cuts. Her lines were taken out, and instead it was Glitchtrap handing over the memory dolls, for some reason. Probably to lead to the bad ending, the possession ending. But in the end, it's clear that Vanny is the mastermind, and she smooshes Glitchtrap. And it was revealed in an interview afterwards that this was truly the end of Glitchtrap. Another thing worth noting is that Help Wanted 2 seems to exist between Security Breach and Ruin. While the game references Ruin a lot, it implies greatly that it takes place before it, showing scenes like Roxy getting her mask, Sun hiding up in his loft with a generator before Moon fully took over, and most importantly, in the bad ending, we see Mapbot handing Cassie the Vanny mask, which kickstarted Ruin, well, other than, everything else that got her to the Pizzaplex. But like I said, Mxes didn't appear in Help Wanted 2 until it received a small update, a teaser for Secret of the Mimic. This included hidden puzzle pieces that you could find throughout the levels, which you would then use outside of the pizzeria at a table in the void. The puzzle would be of the face of Murray's Costume Manor, a location that, funny enough, only appeared in Secret of the Mimic as a miniature. But it was a big step towards revealing the next location, including seeing the front life-sized. Flipping the world with the mask, we now see a van placed before us, and after opening the back, we see that the Mxes' box is being kept inside. The Mxes even pops out in a similar way to in Ruin, and then is dragged inside before the van speeds off. And likely, since at this point we knew Secret of the Mimic would be a prequel, towards the Pizzaplex. This pretty much directly suggested that Mxes came from Murray's Costume Manor, and that Secret of the Mimic would reveal its backstory, what it truly was, where it truly came from, what's the deal. But little did we know, it would also lead to more questions. No, actually, this is Fnaf. We've become pretty accustomed to answers coming with more questions. So, not a big shock, but was a bit of a big deal. So, let's get into Secret of the Mimic, but I'm going to cheat and be very brief. Secret of the Mimic is about Fazbear Entertainment sending a technician named Arnold to collect the Mimic, also known as M2, also known as Experimental Storage Number 2. As we know from the MIC blueprints. This is pretty important. But there is another Mimic. M2 is actually an offshoot of M1, also known as F10-N4 or Fiona. She says this directly. She is a mimic of Edwin's late wife, Fiona. And at some point, she likely had a body like M2, or was the program in control of M2 until she was moved into another body. And this body is very familiar. After consistently lying to Arnold throughout the game, pretending to be a Phasant dispatch agent to mislead him into her plan to get mimic blueprints to reprogram M2 to both stop him from killing and to make him believe he is her dead son David, Arnold walks in on her and, oh hey, that looks awfully familiar. Yeah, Fiona's box is identical to the Mxes box. Well, the only differences being some minor crack differences. The fact that the coloring squares look predominantly purple most of the time with Mxes, but also both share red and green. And that F10-N4 has been changed to Mxes. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that more than likely, this is absolutely the same box as it is said later. But is Fiona the Mxes? Well, that's complicated. For starters, she shuts down to conserve power, and unless she was grabbed up really soon after that, she likely shut down entirely later on. Secondly, Fiona is very vocal throughout Secret of the Mimic, but for some reason she wouldn't have said anything in Ruin. Unless she's actually the one communicating instead of M2, but even that seems a little odd. possible but odd. But she tells Arnold to confront Edwin, who is dead, but she doesn't know that. And through her messages, we find out that she has implored Edwin to create something called the Cradle, also known as Cradle.exe, a program that would contain M2, stop him from killing people, and keep him safe. And up in Edwin's office, Arnold finds a monitor and is able to activate the Cradle.exe program through a very familiar name. Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage Number 1, M1, Mxes. Yes, that is the Mxes' real name. And not only that, yes, that means that this box is the box that the Mxes is. And that it once was Fiona. And it makes a lot of sense considering that it is doing exactly what F10-N4 wanted. It is running the Cradle.exe program. In fact, the entity itself may be an extension of that program. Its goal is to contain the mimic, make sure it can't escape, and keep it safe. That's why it treats trespassers not only as being in danger, but as being the danger. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't only made to protect the outside world, but the mimic inside. The mimic who was supposed to become David. Also, another thing that it might have actually done that was exactly like the other Mxes. We know the Pizzaplex completely collapsed. There was like one huge disruption that caused the whole place to come down. And you know what? This same thing happens to Murray's Costume Manor when you start the Cradle.exe program. Suddenly, the whole place is bursting into flames. And while there has been some speculation that maybe Arnold triggered this from screwing around in the basement, that is possible, it's very coincidental that the whole place starts to self-destruct the second he clicks OK on that program. And this would also explain its control around the Pizzaplex. F10-N4, I'm just switching to Fiona for now. Fiona had control of the building, Murray's Costume Manor. Not over everything, that's why she needed Arnold to get the blueprints, but she could manage doors in the basement. Odds are she could manage most of the doors in the research and development section. She could project her voice through the office, even mimicking Dispatch's voice, and she seemed to have some pull in the virtual world, as not only does she appear in Moon.exe, but through it she's able to gift you this code to reprogram the mimic, a code that you helped create, of course, a glitch code. And assuming that the Moon.exe program isn't like a separate intelligence. So, the Mxes having so much control over the Pizzaplex's security structure and what's in it makes a ton of sense. Though it is somewhat superficial control, as once the security nodes are deactivated it slowly loses more of its grip. And that's probably because the Mxes was planted into the Pizzaplex and then reprogrammed by a technician familiar with the Vanny mask. So here's the timeline of events. Edwin makes M1 and M2. M1, also known as Fiona or Mxes, is planted in the basement and manages some of the operations around her. Place shuts down. Edwin retreats to his house, dies, Arnold arrives, and Fiona instructs him to reprogram M2 and/or activate the Cradle. No matter how it goes, somehow the mimic ends up in the Pizzaplex, and Fiona's depowered box 2 is taken to the Pizzaplex, where it is somewhat altered and renamed to simply Mxes, probably to cover up the Murray connection. Phasant did that a lot. Glitchtrap and Vanny happen. Security breach happens. The earthquake happens, and the shoddy Pizzaplex collapses. Attempts to rebuild fall through. Around this time, if Candy Cadet's story is true, Gregory is lured down into the basement by the mimic but survives. Likely around this time, or maybe before this, someone who was again probably freed Vanessa, reprograms the Mxes box to work the Cradle.exe program again, but this time with a lot of the rabbit-themed accents and with the Vanny mask implemented to see the alternate virtual world. Cassie shuts the Mxes off, the mimic escapes, and then... Wait a minute, something's a little off here. M2 wasn't the one who could attach to radios and lure people in, it was M1. And the reason this is important isn't because Mimic's talking through the radio, it's because even when the radio is off, something is still communicating to Cassie through the Vanny mask. And that doesn't seem like something the Mimic should be able to do. Well, whatever. He has the radio, so it's him. But wait a second. Gregory dropped the elevator, right? He dropped the elevator while dropping the same line Fiona did in the elevator failure recordings.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
It's not your fault.
He's not even at the Pizzaplex. No, that seems more like the Mimic, but M2 wasn't capable of controlling doors or anything, it was M1. Well, that's okay, the controls for the elevator were literally right beside the Mimic. He could have just shut it off right there. How he jacked it to the elevator speaker isn't important. Okay, some stuff is a little off, but for the most part, it makes sense. Except there creeps in the next confusion. The questions. The elephant in the room. That is, the rabbit-shaped elephant in the room. So, let's repeat this. The Mxes, as we know it, is a box used to hold programs and control buildings. Once used to house F10-N4, but now holding this entity that is possibly the Cradle.exe program. An entity that just suddenly looks like a rabbit. Well, because of Vanny, of course. Well, okay, but this rabbit anomaly doing the dirty work, it greatly resembles, well, let's be blunt, Afton. But why is it in Fiona? How is it in Fiona? Why doesn't it look like Vanny? It seems to be the Cradle, but why this form? Well, this is where we get into some speculation territory, because I think we have an answer to what the entity is. It's just only implied, and it's implied not in Secret of the Mimic and Ruin, but mostly in Help Wanted 2. The game where the Mxes didn't really appear. And this is where we have to get into one of those mysteries that Fnaf has flirted with but never directly answered. And that is, what is Glitchtrap? Glitchtrap is a virtual anomaly, a virus that resembles and reflects William Afton while possibly being just a mimicry of him. But despite theories leading both ways, we've never actually gotten like a true smoking gun on Glitchtrap. We know he came off of old hardware Fazbear Entertainment provided. We know he resembles a Murray's mascot, but we know that he was originally supposed to be Spring Bonnie and that was changed in the final hour. I know there is a keychain that says Glitchtrap and Mimic are the same, but, merchandise, the Cassidy kazoo. What we do know is that it can possess humans and does so when it possesses Vanessa. That's how it creates Vanny and takes control of the other animatronics. Something that M1 and M2 are never shown doing in Secret of the Mimic. M2 can overtake one physically, but he never takes control in the same way that Glitchtrap does. And most interestingly enough, Glitchtrap died. He is smushed by Vanny and then was confirmed to be no more. How ironic is it that he gets the axe right as this strange rabbit who can possess the same glam rocks Glitchtrap possessed shows up. With the same glitchy purple accents as Vanny, Moon, Jacko Moon, everyone possessed by Glitchtrap, and is primed to appear as a corpse and then shows up as a ghost. I think, and I can only back this up with coincidences and a likely case scenario, that the entity, which didn't exist in Secret of the Mimic as far as we can see, Fiona was going as a Sun Witch, is the Cradle.exe program, yes, but I think it's been built onto the remains of Glitchtrap, thereby taking on what he was able to do and using it to watch the Pizzaplex and keep the Mimic trapped underneath it. Like I said, we don't know what Glitchtrap truly is. We don't know how much of it was the Mimic, and specifically which Mimic. And we don't know what Vanessa did to the box, save that the Vanny security network was implemented for the same reason that Cradle.exe was, to contain the Mimic. And it just happened to wind up acting like Glitchtrap. Sure, it could just be that Vanessa, coded an entity like Glitchtrap, but this makes more sense if she wasn't truly able to erase him. Rewrite him so he doesn't come back in the same state. Maybe that would also explain why it's so aggressive towards Cassie, a harmless child. It willingly chooses to hunt her instead of just going ahead and finding another avenue to block her. Because remember, M1 was willing to sabotage Arnold, but when it came down to it, it did in certain avenues give him an out. It did see itself as a motherly figure. This thing, no. And let's be blunt, just the fact that it's now a rabbit is a big red flag. If purple flag, if Mxes is Glitchtrap, it makes sense. And if Mxes is entirely unconnected, making him a semi-purple male rabbit was probably not the avenue you wanted to go. Frankly, I still think a Mxes puppet would have been seriously neat, but that's not important. I'd say more, but it's not important. But again, this is not confirmed, it's just a pattern of events. There's still a pretty big gap that we don't know, and that sits squarely on how Mimic got to the Pizzaplex. And while we might get clarification, this kind of feels like the end of the road for Mxes, unless we, get something more. Which means it's not the end of the road. Okay, that was a little backwards, but this feels like it makes sense, at least to me. But while it makes sense when I look at it like this, it takes a lot of assumptions and hopping around to piece these bunny revelations together. Secret of the Mimic did tell us what the Mxes was and where it came from, but like I said, there were so many additional details and so much extra information you have to know to get to that point. If my suspicion is correct, then you have to know about Afton, Glitchtrap, M1, M2, Cradle.exe, the virtual world, Vanny, and the plot points of Ruin, Help Wanted 2, and Secret of the Mimic to come up with that conclusion. And you would have to assume the same endings are canon that I did. It makes sense, but it can feel overwhelming. It really is the nexus of the Fnaf universe, where the same street intersects itself, but you still don't know what direction you're pointing in. But we can at least take some educated guesses, and this is mine, and it might be disproven, and if it is, I'm cool with that, because that would mean that we would at least get another answer. But my thoughts on the Mxes? Complicated. So I do like Mxes, I really like the twist reveal that he's actually the good guy, well, the lesser of two evils. I love his design, even though the other one is creepier. This one is pretty nice. That smugness that just oozes off of him, it's fantastic. I love to hate him, but I don't actually hate him. The fact that he is just this virtual ghost tethered to a metal coffin, I just think he's neat. And I think the revelation introduced in Secret of the Mimic is really neat as well. It got a bit of an oh out of me, I believe. I do believe that it is a little overwhelming having him linked with Fiona, because when we have to dissect him a lot just to get these two split apart, and even then she still might be in the box, might have just woken up the moment the cradle was shut down. Gregory might have never shown up, that might have just been Fiona. But that's just more speculation. But I do think that we missed out on a pretty creepy design. I prefer this one because I like it, but the other one might have made him more intimidating. And while I love the idea of him being Glitchtrap's reused corpse, Code Corpse, that's not confirmed anywhere. That's just an idea I had. He's a character with baggage, but he's pretty cool. And I think he worked as our first true security guard animatronic. Security guard virtual animatronic. Whether or not you count the glam rocks. Will he return? Probably. I don't really expect a role as big as the one he had, but I could totally see his comeback if we had a sequel to Ruin, or if we had a game continuing the Mimic story after Secret of the Mimic. But if he didn't return again, save a mention or something, I wouldn't be shocked as well. He's getting an increase in merchandise attention, so he might be popular enough to encourage a return. But that's the end of the road here, not much else to say, save that if it is revealed that he's Glitchtrap's remains, I actually think that wouldn't just benefit Mxes, I think that would benefit Glitchtrap, because I have seen some complaints and hot takes about Glitchtrap being built up for so long and then just suddenly getting cut down in Help Wanted 2. If it turns out that part of Glitchtrap continued to live on into Mxes, that does continue utilizing him. And that does add, a shade of dark purple to Mxes, whatever that means. But I don't entirely expect that to be the case, and even if it was, I don't necessarily think that we're gonna get a big revelation on it. But my goal was to at least tell you what I do know about the Mxes, and I hope at least I got that out of the way with all the Secret of the Mimic and the Ruin and the Help Wanted 2 stuff. Even if you're not subscribed to the same resolution that I ended up coming up to. May we reach the Mxes of the universe together someday. Anywho, thank you for watching.